Defense of Europe is also defense of our values, our values of liberal democracy and freedom. Well, that should not be forgotten. Peace, because only the strong stance against potential aggressor guarantees that aggressor will not start its adventure.
It's Lithuanian Dream Podcast. Each week, we share ideas from contemporary Lithuania.
Dear Ambassador, thank you for joining us today.
Nice to have this chance to address the audience, your audience of your podcast editions.
Thank you so much. So to start with, could you tell us more? How did you become an ambassador?
Well, actually, I was very much interested in my childhood in international politics. This was still the Soviet era. Well, the atmosphere at home, you understand, was kind of anti-Soviet, and always there were talks, discussions. Lithuania, occupied Lithuania, prospects for Lithuania, to maybe even international politics and prospects to get Soviet Union suppressed by the free world, by United States as the leader of the free world, and all that was of big interest to me, because also that was very much related to the history of my family. And my grandfather, father of my father, was the one of the leaders of the resistance movement, partisan war in Western Lithuania, and he was betrayed, captured, executed. And I knew that in my childhood. That was kind of important to me. But of course, in Soviet era, I could not dream of being an active an actor in international politics, as long as the Lithuanian state was not there. I joined mathematics department in Vilnius University and successfully graduated from it, but that was already after we regained independence. In the meantime, during my studies, there was this liberation movement, Sąjūdis, first reform movement that very soon, in early 1989, was transformed into liberation movement, as long as on the 16th of February 1989, council of this reform movement made a statement that the ultimate goal of the movement is to achieve independence of Lithuania. And I was a very active member of that movement as a student, and organizing students to support rallies, events of that reform movement and all that. And on the first occasion when I heard about the possibility to join Ministry of Foreign, a newly re-established Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I opted for that, applied, and I was admitted, and started first as administrative officer, but then joined the Institute of International Relations to get some academic background for my work, which was possible then to combine with my already work in the ministry, to study parallelly, and then soon after that I was transferred to the political department and became a diplomat. I came in the right moment. At that time, there were very few of us young people who were building up the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs because of very low salaries in the public sector, and us youngsters who invested into the future benefited a lot of that. And I was not perhaps the worst one. In 2004, I was offered to become an ambassador in Hungary. So that was my first ambassadorship. Before that, for 3 years, I was working as diplomatic advisor to the Prime Minister. Of course, that position of a diplomatic advisor to the Prime Minister facilitated a lot perception among the key decision makers that, I'm more or less, even for an ambassadorship, being still quite young, 36, 37 years old.
Wow, it sounds like being young, ambitious person really worked for you, and like knowing what you really want, right? So you really knew back in 1989 or 1990s that you want to be a diplomat. So what did you learn through this process, and what kind of skills or things would you say were really useful as a diplomat striving for success?
We, as diplomats, we rotate in between the capital and some foreign posting, but we also rotate through the topics. The higher position we have, the more broad scope of responsibility we have, the broader competence, or at least decent degree of knowledge we need to have. So the more the person is interested in everything that is taking place in his country or international arena, and it's not only about general kind of international relations, foreign policy, but it's about various aspects of its society, of the economy, of its culture, of the major issues, of the major challenges for the society. Everything about the state, about the society should be something that is of interest. And you have to absorb as much information as possible. And then to use that information in representing your country, and to always look for arguments how to defend the one or another interest of your country, using that broad scope of information that you have accumulated, and act according to the instruction you get from your capital. Political decision makers, sometimes they change. And then you have to be flexible enough to really also start playing on the other side of the argument. And that's also the task for a diplomat. And I remember my relationship to nuclear power. So I had to shift the positions throughout my career, and even before the career, several times, and successfully defend one or the opposite position. That's also the fate of a diplomat. I recall myself in '88. I still remember 6th of September '88. I was one of those 5,000 or 6,000 our reform movement activists that made a live chain about our nuclear power plant in then Semaška, now Visaginas, or internationally known as Ignalina nuclear power plant, chanting Russians go home and take this nuclear power plant with you, and away from Lithuania. And then 10 years later, as a Lithuanian diplomat in Washington, was fiercely defending the preservation of nuclear power in Lithuania, at the time when EU was pressing us to commit to decommissioning of the nuclear power plant, and Americans joined their partners in the European Union in pressing us to decommission it and to commit to stopping the operations and decommissioning. And then 2 years later, in 2000, I joined our campaign for greater awareness. Already back in Lithuania, and there was the campaign, by the way, organized by my wife, who is also a diplomat, to raise the awareness about NATO, because then we had this accession to NATO process, not only to EU but also to NATO, but as long as these were two parallel processes, so always in the meetings with different audiences in Lithuania, I used to be confronted with that question: why do we need to shut down the nuclear power plant? Because at that time, Lithuanian society was very much pro-nuclear, and that was the most difficult political issue in the domestic political debate, and whether we should accept this requirement from the EU to commit to decommissioning of the nuclear power plant. And then I had to explain that well, that's not the biggest treasure we have, and it's really not worth sacrificing our EU membership prospects for this nuclear power plant, and so better to agree with this political requirement and not to lose the prospect of joining the EU. But then a few years later, already as ambassador in Hungary, I had to, again, upon the instruction from my Minister of Foreign Affairs, to try to get the agreement from Hungarian government to support our appeal for renegotiating our accession agreement in order to get the right to extend the operation of the nuclear power plant that we have in Lithuania. So that also happens, and that diplomat should be able to accept and to defend the position. But that is coming as an instruction from the political decision makers in your country, in the respective country, and so basically, but one is able to do that when he is able to has a broad knowledge, broad scope of knowledge, on broad scope of issues, but also is able to, when needed, to get deeper and to get certain competence to be able to argue and to defend the position. So those are the requirements for those who want to be a good diplomat.
So yeah, it sounds really fascinating that you actually managed to shift from one, really specific position to another when it was required, and to see, the bigger purpose and see what is the country needing now. And actually, it changed a lot in Lithuania. Now GDP is one of the fastest growing from all the countries that joined in 2004. So it was the right decision, but still people are talking about nuclear plant, and now especially with the nuclear plant in Belarus. Why do you think, because you lived here now for quite a while,
2 years.
2 years, yes. So you got to know people, especially the decision makers here. Why do you think the people, German people, don't understand the threat from the country that was the threat before in Europe? Everybody knows that the human rights in, for example, Russia is not in a good condition. And for example, we live in Berlin, that is quite liberal city. So just putting these two facts together, it would look like people would understand the differences between two countries and the need to actually talk about it more openly.
The 30 years of messaging from politicians, from analysts, from the side of different actors, NGOs, representatives of different walks of life in the society, that the Cold War is over. We are living, in the peaceful world, and at least here in Europe, there are any more foreseeable defense challenges. Still, until 2014, we had those statements in each and every communique of NATO. That is the reason why it is very difficult to change the paradigm, the perception of paradigm, and thinking is based on the information that was supplied to the general audience, and then there's a lot of this kind of self-convincing process that when you repeat that many times and many years in a row, and you start believing that. I saw that. Sometimes I feel that myself, and especially when that is related to something that is addresses the interest of each of us, daily interest of each of us. Because changing that perception means that you have to give up some public goods. You have to divert significant funds from other sectors, public sectors, to defense. And of course, people don't want that. They think that the threat or the risks are somewhere far away, and that when they did not know anything about those risks for 30 years, did not hear about those risks, they don't want to really give up those public goodies that they are used to, or there's usually a process that you want increasingly more of those public goods, and here you have to say no, we stop here, and we all the additional revenue that we get we divert to defense, and the sector that was neglected for 30 years, and it's very difficult. It's not only psychologically different; it's also against this kind of very selfish daily interest of each member of the society. So therefore, the political leadership here is of paramount importance, and again, for politicians, that's very difficult to agree with. To sacrifice considerable part of their political credit for the right cause, because definitely, the first ones who go along the path of effort to change the perception, they sacrifice their political credit.
Can we see the positive change in this decision making? Are there more countries that now spend around 2% for the national defense in the NATO, or is it not? It's going down. What's the trend now?
No, there is a positive trend, and definitely, and each year we have 1 or 2 countries joining this so-called 2% club. Here in Germany, we also have a positive trend already for a number of years. The defense expenditure is rising. Of course, we need much more, but there is, and we see and we hear already more political voices that support more investment and more expenditure for defense. Of course, our Lithuanian interest is that this trend would be stronger, faster, more up the hill. I mean, would kind of this up the hill would be steeper, and the direction would be steeper up the hill and faster.
But do you think it will ever change? Because it's simply because we have the history, and we are a small country next to, you know, the huge power Russia. We feel threatened. It's international relations, right? So will it ever change that big countries that was never under the occupation will understand the smaller states and their you know, why they are so frightened, and why don't we feel safe if not everybody understands and invests enough?
Germany, until 1989, was spending much more than 2% of their gross domestic product for defense. And they were used to really having regular military drills. German people were used to their autobahns, highways being regularly blocked with lots of military vehicles, and were used to those inconveniences, and then they understood that, well, that's needed because of this, well, force just across Elbe River. Now, some political analysts, some figures, public figures, and some politicians try to remind about that, and there are positive signs that at some point perhaps the younger people will understand what their parents or grandparents were accepting as a kind of daily reality, and as something that is needed, that is not very convenient, but not very comfortable with, but that is needed. Well, it will be very interesting to observe the reaction in media and in the public this year, later in spring. We have a really very large military mobility exercise in Europe, here in Germany, in the Baltics, in Poland, when really some 20 or even more thousand American troops will be shipped to Europe and will train and will exercise in the Baltics, in Poland, will be moving across Germany. So you can expect, well, you don't have, I understand you use public transportation, but you can expect lots of traffic jams on autobahns. And then it will be really interesting to see how general public reacts to that. But that military mobility exercise is of paramount importance to us. We already are planning to participate in some communication exercises to kind of explain to German people that for us, the Baltics, that is a kind of existential issue, and we appreciate their patience, and we would appreciate them accepting that as something very much needed for defense of Europe, because defense of the Baltics is also defense of Europe.
And the freedom in a democratic country, I think, is understood by everyone. So
definitely, that is, well, defense of Europe is also defense of our values, of our values of liberal democracy and freedom. Well, that should not be forgotten. Peace, because only the strong stance against potential aggressor guarantees that aggressor will not start its adventure.
So to finish up with, on this note, I would like to ask you the question we always ask to our guests, what is your dream for Lithuania in the upcoming 10, 20, 30 years?
This nice trend that we have now, when we have already more incomers into Lithuania than outgoers, that it will become even stronger, that this incomers, that at least in that incoming part we have about 2/3 of Lithuanians that are returning back, and 1/3 of mostly Ukrainians or Belarusians that coming in as economic migrants, that we will have a situation when incoming Lithuanians will be at least as big part as those that are leaving for studies or employment opportunities. Our people, our younger generation, will opt for giving more births, and that our demographic natural birth situation will be also even more improving. It is improving. It is dramatically better, much better than it was in 2002, when we had the worst ever situation with that regard. But we need more. We need more births. We need bigger families, and so I hope that again we will be more than 3 million 10 years from now, and that we will be a younger society, and that we shall have a lot of those who want to create, to work, to build their country in Lithuania, and that Lithuania will be a very nice corner of Europe.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for a really informative and interesting conversation. I believe people will really learn something new, and I hope your wish will come true.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
It's Lithuanian Dream Podcast. Each week, we share ideas from contemporary Lithuania.